Good morning, folks. My name is Robert Burke. I'm with the SIG Armorer. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'm going to do something in this video that I have never done before. I'm going to get super serious, and as such, I'm going to sit down. I normally stand, but I'm going to grab this chair right here and have a good seat. Okay. This video is me illustrating my opinion on the P320 pistol. So settle in. I'm going to say things that are kind of SIG, and I'm going to say things that aren't so kind. So let's just dive in. My name is Robert Burke. I'm the head gunsmith at the SIG Armorer. I've been working on P320 pistols since their inception, since 2014. I see 40 to 50 a week, so that adds up to what, 8 or 10,000 pistols that I've worked on. We also have our own aftermarket parts that we've been developing since 2018 for both the P series and the P320 pistol. Let's start with disclaimers. What you're watching is for entertainment purposes only. The opinions and views expressed in this video are of mine only, Robert Burke, and do not necessarily represent the views of the SIG Armorer, SIG Sauer, or any other entities mentioned. Once again, this video is for entertainment purposes only. Please don't mess with your gun. Let's get right into the timeline for the P320. It came out in 2014. Everybody knows about the drop problem. If you dropped it at just the wrong angle, basically 30 degrees, the mass of the trigger combined with the mass of the striker allowed it to fire. However, the upgrade, which was issued just directly after that, fixed the drop problem. And I do want to touch on that real quick. We haven't had, that I can find, any drops where the gun is dropped on the ground and goes off since the upgrade happened. And that is important to remember, because I'm going to talk about the upgrade, why certain parts of it exist, and how it is effective in keeping the gun safe from a drop. So the drop problem came out. It was fixed by the upgrade. However, the upgrade brought in 1 or 2 additional small problems. The first one being the out of battery case eruption problem, which I won't go into in depth because we've already solved it with our sport disconnector. However, in the last few months and years, as everybody knows, there's been an uncommanded discharge problem. There's lots of reports online. There's, hey, my hand wasn't on it. Hey, I just got out of the car. There's so many instances that we had to take them all into account. And basically the last 2 nights, I've been watching every bit of videos on YouTube to refresh my memory from the ones I saw last year, just to make sure we weren't missing any piece of evidentiary material. So as soon as we've learned about the UD problem, we decided to do our own testing. So here's how our testing worked. We loaded a firearm, a P320, with a snap cap, and we set it on the table. And we said, okay, I want you to fire. And it won't do it. No amount of a static test. You can sit here and look at this gun all day and it won't fire. So we ruled out the gun just firing in a static test. So let's go to a vibratory test. So we figured, okay, the gun is in a static form. The Sear and the striker are fully integrated. Let's vibrate the living piss out of it and see if we can get the striker to overcome the Sear and go forward. And just to show you, here's stage 1 of our vibratory system, where we were able to hook up an amplifier and an iPhone and choose this very specific frequency and then vibrate that gun pretty much all day at that frequency or a sweep tone in order to see if we could get any movement out of the striker. We didn't get any movement out of the little one, so we moved to the bigger one, which again produced 0 outcome whatsoever. So we vibrated the tar out of this thing. We also die-chemmed and put carbon paper on, all over the action so we could see what parts were moving, even if there wasn't a failure. And we found no movement whatsoever. Vibrating the gun produced absolutely no movement from the striker on the Sear, or Sear on the striker, however you want to see it. So we're like, okay, well, let's take it one more. Let's go dynamic. Let's literally bash the crap out of this thing. So we moved away from the previous testing, and we went on to dynamic testing, where we just dropped the gun over and over. And this is one of them. As you can see, it's not pretty. Ignore the slide catch lever. That only broke when we ran it over. Because, if you try to break something for a couple of months and you fail, you really want to break it. So we brought in an army truck, ran it over. Anyways, I'll post that video later on so y'all can see it. So we dropped this gun over and over and over again, and again, could not get the sear and the striker to separate whatsoever. So our only working theory that came out of this, so we basically said, okay, if this problem is happening and no one's touching the trigger, how is this happening? So here's kind of what we came to for our working theory that was quickly knocked down. So basically, when you're loading the gun, our theory was that as the slide is coming into close, the striker is running into the preloading ramp of the Sear, compressing it slightly, hitting the corner, and then jumping to the top. It has to perch up there on the top. It can't go past, because we'll go into that later. The striker safety won't be defeated. It must go up the preloading ramp, up to the knuckle, up to the top of the tooth, excuse me, and then it must perch there and then fall forward at some point from a jostle or what have you. But what we found is that that's impossible, because not only is it impossible for the striker to jump up to the top of the Sear, it's also impossible for when the Sear falls for there to be enough force to push the Sear down to disconnect the safety lever. And I'm gonna show you that right now. Okay, so what we did was we created a fixture that held the gun perfectly perpendicular, and then we put in a cutaway a Sear block and a cutaway rear cap, so we could bring in a punch and precisely push down on the Sear at exactly the numbers that we wanted to. And this is what we came up with. And I'm going to hold this real quick so you can pause it and check it out. So let's get into some science. Okay, so when you pull the trigger, this is what happens. You pull the trigger. After the Sear has moved downward about 40,000ths of an inch, the safety lever is defeated. It's ready to fire. Then you get to 0.050, the striker falls, and we have a fire. And then the bottom out, where the trigger won't go any further, the Sear has only actuated 0.090 inches. So we have the safety lever being defeated, the firing of the striker, and the complete travel to stop. Now let's talk about the situation when you do the Sear test, when you press on the back of the Sear. So the first thing that happens is at 0.030, the rear leg comes into play, which is exactly what it's designed to do. Once that Sear starts moving down the striker, if it's not aided by the trigger pull, then the rear leg of the Sear abuts the trigger bar, and the trigger bar and the trigger bar spring then become extra weight on that Sear movement. So we have the rear leg picking up at 0.030 like it's supposed to. We have striker fall at 0.067, which is 0.0167 past normal, not that big of a deal. But we have to wait until all the way to 0.130 for the safety lever to be defeated. And of course, the full travel when doing the Sear test is 0.175. So the interesting thing to take away from this is how you get from here to here. Let's say something pushes the Sear, right? Okay, the striker falls, but you've got to find a way to dynamically and with speed push the Sear from this point to this point for the safety lever to be defeated in time. Because as soon as the striker falls, it's headed towards its home. And you must get to this point in order for it to fire a shot. Which means that you have to not only push on the rear of the Sear in the Sear test, you have to push it hard and fast. You have to push it so fast that you get all the way to the rear of its travel and get lucky enough to beat the strikers going home and have the safety lever defeated before it goes home. This is not a condition that is possible in the real world. It is only possible during this test. So therefore, I believe the Sear test is absolutely invalid. It proves nothing except that you must get from here to here somehow. And no one can explain to me so far how that happens. And keep in mind, we've taken this gun and we have bashed it as hard as we can over and over and over again, and absolutely cannot get any sort of movement from the Sear whatsoever. So I'm glad that Sear test popped up. I'm glad that it's something that we could then reproduce, because it shows that it's impossible under its own weight or under its own movement for the Sear to go downward enough to go from here to here quick enough for a shot to be fired. Now you're saying, well, it certainly is possible, but it's not plausible. Okay, let's talk about forces, all right? So the trigger pull is 4.5 pounds times 0.190 in travel. The Sear test is 7 pounds times 0.175 inch of travel. So the joules, or the Newton meters, in order to actuate the trigger is only 45.64. But the amount of force in order to actuate the Sear test fully is 65.39, a full third greater. So literally you have to push the Sear harder than you pull the trigger. And therefore, I just think it's an invalid test. The other thing I'd like to show you is a little, it's a terrible photo, or a terrible picture, but I'm trying to illustrate the clamping effect. When the slide comes into battery and the striker seats on the Sear is above its pivot center line. So every time the striker comes home, it's not pushing down on the Sear, it's pulling up on it. So therefore, my previous theory about perching on the top and then going forward, it's just not possible. We can't have the striker jump over the Sear. It's just not possible with the way it's designed. So how I was proven wrong. Obviously our own testing proved that nothing we did created a problem. In the last couple of weeks since I teased this video, I've had tons of outfits come out to me with information that I've had to process, and most all of it was on SIG's side, basically saying that there's nothing wrong with the pistol and that it's operator error. I will say, under full disclosure, that we did have a meeting with SIG last week. They reached out to me before I placed the video and they said, hey, if you have any questions, we'd like to answer them. I said, fine. We did an hour-and-a-half conference call in which we didn't see eye to eye. There was a time where they said, I don't believe me, or they don't believe me, and I said straight to their face, I don't believe you. And they said, fine, come on out. So I flew out to New Hampshire, spent a whole day with them, including 5 hours in the boardroom with Adrian Tomel and a few of their other high-ranking engineers, in which they fielded all of our questions. For 5 hours, we basically interrogated them to the tune of about 70 questions until all of our questions were answered and our fears were assuaged. So I do want to let y'all know that I did go to SIG and did get a lot of information from them. So let's talk about the rear leg and why it stays. So earlier I talked about the drop problem, and ever since the upgrade, which incorporates the rear leg, we haven't had any drop fires that I can find. Now, granted, there's the masked guy who says a lot but really bloviates, who says, oh, well, a whistleblower says that it's still a problem. I don't believe so. We would have had evidence. We would have had, oh, I dropped my gun on the ground, it went off. We simply don't have those things. It just doesn't exist. So that's why, a lot of people are saying, hey, let's cut off the rear leg. Please don't do that. The rear leg is designed to help with the drop problem. So as illustrated with this, you saw that the rear leg is picked up at 30 thousandths, or 30 thousandths, well before the striker falls. And that adds to the drop safety of the pistol itself. So let's move on and talk about tolerance stacking. The theory is that because the frames have a lot of tolerance, parts can indeed have stacking, which will end up, problematic. I can neither confirm nor deny that, but I do want to talk about two specific things as they pertain to older SIGs. We get SIGs, P320s, all the way from 58A, which is the original serial number, all the way to 58H, or whatever the modern one is now, or 58G. We have had 2 instances in the last 4 years of FCUs that have come in here and the holes were slightly misaligned. And when I mean slightly, I mean a tiny bit. Not to the point where there was anything wrong with the gun, not to the point where there was any failures, but we could measure that the pivot pin hole for the Sear is slightly off. That has happened twice. Once about 5 years ago on a 58A serial number FCU, and another one about 2 weeks ago on a 58B frame. So if you're going to speculate on the stacking issue, then you would start with, well, maybe we should avoid 58A and 58B serial number prefixes, because back then they didn't have the same kind of factory that they have now. And I can only say that because I toured the factory in 2018 and I toured the factory just a week and a half ago. There was a difference in the quality control that I saw last week versus years ago. In full disclosure, I have to say, when I was there in 2018 on the P320 FCU line, I saw 3 employees sitting on buckets with DeWalt drills reaming the FCU holes. And I'll never forget it because I couldn't imagine seeing that inside the Sig Sauer factory. However, nothing of that was evident at the new factory. The new factory is untouchable. I mean, not only have they automated and optically sorted each process as much as they could, but they have after check processes. So they'll have a machine that runs 6 units at a time on a certain pass, a certain cut, and then they'll take that out, put it in a fixture, and then go no-go all the holes. So I'm very confident, basically based on what I saw and what I see here on the bench, that the modern P320 FCUs are very, very good. However, I can't say that about 58A and 58B frames. They are, if you have one, grab it, check it out, maybe even compare it to a new one. You'll see just from the outside that there is a little bit of a finish difference, a little bit of construction difference, manufacturing differences between those two. However, the bigger thing to check when you have a 58A or 58B gun is the striker safety block or striker safety lever. I have 2 of them here that are broken. These came in a couple of years ago from one client. Now that one client happens to be Max Michel, and he puts way more rounds on guns than you and I do. And I should say the gun still worked when it came in. Just because the safety lever was broken, the gun absolutely worked just fine. So here's that lever right here. And you can see it's missing this part right here. Here's the other one right here. You can see it's missing this part right there. Now, pay attention, you can see that the side of that is pocketed and it has numbers on it, which would be indicative that it's an MIM part. So this is the one part on the gun where they really can't MIM it, and they found out because they broke. So if you're really concerned about your gun and you want to do something proactive, check your serial, see if you have an older one, but more importantly, take your striker out, or rather, have a professional take your striker assembly out and inspect the safety lever. If it's MIM, I do suggest replacing it. Now, let's go to the Sear test. I showed you this. Let me check my notes here. Okay, I went over the results and I went over the clamping effect. So the Sear test, what it proves to me is that our working theory of basically the striker sitting right at the edge of the Sear and perching itself, and then some sort of jostling, allowing it to go past, it had to have a function of pushing the Sear down. As I showed you, without pushing the Sear down, the safety lever cannot be defeated. And as such, this Sear test to me proves, or rather disproves, my theory altogether, because the system just does not work as they have suggested. And we've illustrated that here. So now let's move on to the 4-facet Sear perch that just came out. Of course, I had to test that ad nauseum for the last couple of days. And it's a neat test. I mean, it's a lot like buying a new Corvette, taking out the ABS, putting in brakes from a Volkswagen, deliberately driving it into a ravine, and then calling Chevrolet and saying, "See, I told you there was something wrong." The fact that we have to do this test, or that someone did this test in order to dispel it, or not dispel it, to confirm that it is a thing, is really disturbing, because you have to F with your gun in 4 different ways, and that's just plain stupid. However, there was a really good outcome from that video, and you'll notice when he is pointing off into the sawgrass, he pulls the slide back, finger off the trigger, he lets it go, and what happens there is, as the slide is coming to close, the Sear is being held down by that 10 millimeter, takedown safety lever. As such, when it comes to close, the Sear comes in and perches. The striker comes in and perches on the Sear just long enough to be compressed. That kinetic force of the compression, the movement of the slide, holds it together. And then as soon as the slide stops, then it goes forward. And what we found, as well as other people have found, is the only way to make this a problem, or rather to discharge, is to break and or remove the safety lever or safety lever spring. And this is critical information to me, because the only way for my previous theory to work is for when the striker gets past the sear, it has to magically push it down, like a lot. As you can see, quite a lot. But what we found through this test and through the video is that there is no sear movement downward other than just enough to let the striker pass, which means that every time you try this experiment, but with an intact safety lever, you will get no fire whatsoever. Okay, let's move on. What we believe is causing the problem. Okay, I believe it's light-bearing holsters. Let's start there. When you have a light-bearing holster, you have a huge opening right next to, or right around the trigger guard and trigger. And this allows all sorts of items to get in there and cause havoc with the trigger itself. I think that is what's most likely happening here, is that someone's clothes are getting in there, or debris, or in the case of the officers in the vestibule, the guy leans over, the other officer's keys get into the opening. As he stands up, the keys pull the trigger. So the light-bearing holster is a huge problem, specifically with larger lights. I think in the future, we really should have smaller lights that are the width of the trigger guard, so that there's not a big opening at the top of the holster. The next thing that I'd like to talk about that I think contributes to this is outdated training or outdated technique. I just don't feel like it's safe to index. Put your finger right next to the trigger. And keep in mind, the only way your finger can really move is towards it. I don't like indexing the trigger as you're headed toward the holster. It'll hit that hole, go in there, and without you even knowing it, it's possible to pull the trigger. So I think in the future, we really should consider some changes to the holstering technique. Specifically, I think the best thing to do is do a flying trigger finger. I do not believe in any way there's a reason for your finger to be on the gun while you're holstering. I like to fly it away. I've always done it like that. I've never understood why people wanted to have their finger that close. All right, the other thing I think that is contributing to this is reholstering haste. I know you've all been there, you've been at a match and you got the guy who shoots or he loads and he just frickin' stabs at it. Like he's looking off this direction, he's like, no, it'll get in there. Oh, that is so frustrating to me. We've got to take more care in holstering a pistol. You've got to slow down, clear your garment, make sure there's nothing in your working area, which is the area around your holster. You need to visually look into your holster. You need to fly away the trigger finger and slowly rock the gun into place. I know that can be tough for LEO who are in dynamic situations, but I think that we've got to slow down the holstering and we've got to change the indexing. It just doesn't make sense to do that anymore. So we have all these instances where the gun has gone off and people say, hey, I didn't touch the trigger. Keep in mind that startle effect is real. I don't know everything about it, but I know that when you're startled, you tend to do a number of things. First and foremost, the most important being your hands raise, your shoulders raise, your arms raise, and your fingers extend like this. That's the startle effect. So if you had your hand on the gun when it went off, or rather had your finger on the trigger not knowing it, you would immediately pull them off and most likely have no memory of the second or so before that startle. So the startle happens, and then you are basically wiped clean of the memory of, oh, well, was my trigger finger on there or not? And I think that has a huge effect, especially if people are actuating the trigger while it's going into the holster and then pulling their hands off, they can go, well, my hands weren't on it. So the other thing I think is becoming an effect here, excuse me, I gotta get some coffee, is cover your ass. And I'm not even mad at the people who lie to cover their asses. I'm not mad at them at all. Because imagine you're a cop, you know, you've only been on there 3 or 4 years, you're not making that much, your wife is probably out of work because of COVID, you have all these crazy restraints, you're in a liberal town, so if you admit that you pulled the trigger, it's likely you would lose your job and your family would be on the street. So I'm not even mad at those people, because in my opinion, survival of the fittest, you do what you have to do. But I personally think there's a lot of CYA happening. On top of that, it's possible there's just straight unsurety, meaning, man, I don't know if my finger was on the trigger or not. I have no clue, you know, whether their memory failed them or the startle effect meant that memory went away. there's just possibly some unsurety involved with these people. And because they want to err on the side of preserving their jobs and their livelihood, which I completely understand, they tend to err on the side of, well, I wasn't touching it. Those are just some of the things I believe that are greatly contributing to the problem. So now you want to ask, okay, what can you do as the consumer to protect yourself from these things? Rather, I can't say the problem exists because I don't believe there's a problem with the P320 pistol. Other than the things I'm about to list. So check for the MIM safety lever, striker safety. If you have that, I would definitely replace it. Consider having your older P320 inspected. Take it to an armor or a gunsmith, have them inspect it. Make sure everything is straight and true, especially if you have a 58A or 58B serial. Do not install parts you're unsure of. A lot of these videos we have going around, people have to mess with their gun. They have to take this out, they have to put that in, they have to take a part out, put the wrong part in deliberately. So avoid that. Do not remove parts from your gun. I mean, I shouldn't even have to say that. Slow down reholstering. Again, pay extreme attention to your holstering technique. Make sure nothing is in there. Make sure nothing's around it. I highly suggest flying the trigger finger as you're going slowly into place. Make sure your garment is pulled away. And then last thing I would do is consider a smaller weapon mounted light and a fitted holster. Because the smaller the light is, or rather the narrower it is, the less likely you are to have a huge opening here and here in your holster. Okay, in summation, I don't believe there's anything wrong with the P320 pistol as it exists right now. It's possible that the older ones could have had something to contribute to the problem. However, we don't have any evidence of that. We're just speculating. I'm only saying what I'm saying about the older frames because I've seen it with my own two eyes that they've been slightly out of spec. And I've seen the broken safety lever with my own two eyes as well because I have them here. Apart from those things, the modern pistol, I don't believe has anything wrong with it. I just don't. And I'm glad I can come to you and make this video with all the evidence that I've taken in, all the numbers of videos that I've watched. I'm confident in my assertion here. However, I am a man of science. If someone gives me evidentiary material to the contrary, I will make a video after I test it, and if I'm proven wrong, I will tell y'all. But as of today, May 30th, 2025, this is my opinion. Yeah, that's it. What a nightmare, what a mess. Like, I didn't get into working on SIG pistols to solve a global problem, you know. I solve singular, minute problems one at a time for one client at a time. So the idea of having to take on a global problem that affects everybody on earth, including our military, was incredibly daunting and frustrating. And I haven't gotten shit done around here. That's why I'm making this video right now, because I'm getting 6 to 8 calls a day asking the same question, and I like to be patient and explain, you know, exactly what I just explained to you to every person, but I just can't do it. I would much rather be working on clients' guns or trying to innovate something new here in the shop. But that hasn't been possible in the last few months with all the testing and all the things we've had to pay attention to as this problem has unfolded. So thanks for watching. I hope it's been helpful. I might cut in a video of my testing procedure as far as the Sear testing goes. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and thanks for being a patron of the SIG Armor.